Welcome to Good Morning Hospitality, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the industry. From hotels and short-term rentals to all things travel and hospitality, you'll find each episode equips you with the information that you need to start your week. Join us on Good Morning Hospitality every Monday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Leo. How's it going? Really good. What about you?
Well, I tell you what, I'm all the better for seeing you back from your holiday. We missed you.
Yeah, it was really great to get away, but it's good to be back. So thanks. It's fab.
I mean, what could be better than finishing a holiday knowing you're going to do a podcast with me, right?
That's right. Things to look forward to. I was rushing home, Leo.
Don't believe you at all. Thank you for that. Thank you for sarcasm there. But you timed it well, didn't you? Because you went away, I think, when the world was still in summer, and now the whole world seems to be in autumn. So, kudos, well done. You played a blinder. Beautiful part of the world. Do you enjoy yourself?
It was absolutely fabulous. Yeah, there was. I had my full agenda planned. Lots of hiking and things like that. It was like 4 days and just a little mini escape. And interesting enough, like it wasn't a total disaster with the, bring your own sheets and do your own cleaning and whatever, because they were small, like studio flats in like ski towns. And so there was nothing else to do if you're not skiing. And they were basically ghost towns. So there was nobody there. Like like, with my friend, we were like, oh, let's go down to the bar and grab a drink. I was like, there's no bar. And they're like fully shut. It's actually fabulous for me. So we got a discount. Of course, there was no cleaning because there's nobody there. So we did have to do the cleaning, but it took us like, I don't know, half an hour. It was fine. And then other than that, I hate skiing and I hate winter. So it was perfect for me because I got a cheap place in a beautiful location. And also the town has a glacier. And I'm pretty sure in the winter you wouldn't see the glacier because it'd be covered in snow. So it's like a win-win all around.
Wow, that's so cool. I do like that. So it's kind of off-season travel at its best. I really like it, the idea of beating the crowd. So this is a very extreme version of it because even the bar's been boarded up and down. So what do you do then? Do you just sort of chug wine from a paper bag?
Yeah, I mean, we were prepared for all scenarios, Leo. So I think we had like 5 or 6 bottles of wine for 4 days, so it was fine. We had to stop.
Good. Well, I'm sure you made sure you went through that stock. And yeah, imagine the glacier was nice. So you should post some pictures and link back to the show so people can see what you've been doing. So you basically had a retro short-term rental experience. You did your own cleaning. Does that mean you had to bring your own cleaning supplies as well, or were they provided?
No, there were cleaning supplies, but there was a weird note that was like, "Hey, cleaning supplies are provided, but if anything runs out, please buy more." It was like a very strange situation. I mean, it was fine, I guess.
I'm here for it.
As long as you know what you're getting. And I think really the accommodation for 4 days in August in the French Alps was like 240 euros or something. It was it was super cheap between two of us. So what can you expect? You know,
it's brilliant. No, it's brilliant. I love it. I think there's a website there. I do. I think there's a travel brand, off-season travel. Get away from the crowds, quite literally. And then you can post
Ghost Town Getaway, Leo.
That's it,
that thing,
Sarah. That's it. You heard it here first. Ghost Town Getaways. And the more boarded up the town is, the better.
Yeah.
I watched a show actually. Watched a Vice documentary on YouTube a couple of nights ago, while my little boy was sleeping on my chest, about how Route 66 is obviously no longer what it was, and there's bigger roads and people don't really use it. And they were traveling on Route 66. And you had all these like abandoned motels, and the odd one is still open, water parks, petrol stations. And I was like, God, I love that. I'd love to be doing that. I don't know what that says about me, about whether I'm a loner or not, but there you go. So I'm in. I'm totally in. I'm quite jealous that you had that experience. We're off on holiday next. We're going to Marseille in France, which I'm looking forward to. Getting the train this year as well. We're trying to be green. So yeah, I'll be soon joining you on holiday.
That's awesome. Yeah, how long are you going for, Leo?
Just a week, just a solid week. Going with some friends who've also got kids. But yeah, I could go to France every year. I really could. You could go to France at different times of year, depending on what you want to do, right? So, yeah, apart from, obviously, it seems no one really wanted to go there when the Olympics was on. But I think France is always a winner. It's always a winner for me. So yeah, can't wait. Now, since you've been away, Sarah,
Yes.
Oasis have announced that they're reforming. We're very excited about it on the show. Damien and I talked about it last week because obviously Damien is very, very old. So he was at his peak when Oasis were sort of bashing around the place. Oasis fan, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with it, to be honest. Like, this was one of the first interactions I'd had, so I feel like I'm not even in the industry, Leo.
There we
Honestly,
go.
we were discussing it for the pod, so maybe it's generational. I don't know.
Stop
Poor
it!
Damien.
Stop it!
I'm just kidding.
So cheeky. That's so unfair. We're similar. Come on, we're similar-ish. Don't do that. Damien's the old one. Come on, Damien's the old one.
Women. Poor Damien.
No, we think maybe they didn't break America all that well, although different people in the Good Morning Hospitality universe are telling me different things. But anyway, let's say it's that. We think this is Europe's Taylor Swift moment, although let's be honest, Taylor Swift went everywhere. So already we're starting to see booking trends affected by this, and we are going to continue to occasionally reference what we're going to call Oasis Watch, or will I find suitable accommodation? Definitely, maybe. Putting a song title there, lost on you, Sarah, because you don't know the band. But there you go. Someone at home's going to like that.
I had very excited colleagues this week. Somebody came in and was like in the best mood, and usually the guy's quite grump. And I was like, "Oh, well, you're in a good mood. What's going on?" And now it all makes sense, Leo. When you were like, "Oh, this is my highlight. I'm going to talk about this," and I looked at the article, I was like, "Oh, now that's what he was banging on about." Oasis is back. Oasis is back. Well, I don't even know who you're talking about. What you're talking about?
Well, I'm looking forward to Sarah going through Oasis's back catalogue and coming to us next week to tell us she's now a super fan and that she's booked tickets on the black market for £2,000 just to go and watch it. So they've reformed after 16 years. Cynically, we're saying they've probably just run out of money, but they've agreed to do 14 stadium gigs: London, Manchester, Edinburgh, Dublin, finishing in Dublin. What a place to have a gig. The tour is expected to generate about £400 million for the UK economy when you include merchandise, people eating out, drinking, especially accommodation. Here we go. This is where we always talk about the beauty of short-term rental and how we can really provide value add when there is a pinch point in the accommodation supply, which is why we're going to focus on Oasis Watch over the next couple of months. So we're already hearing about booking cancellations. So some hotel groups have been accused of cancelling existing bookings to resell the night at higher rates. This is interesting. Now we're going to need more evidence on this. We need to investigate further. But if that's true, I'm not at all surprised. And clearly we're going to see price hikes. I've talked about the Edinburgh example for a long time. There is certain pinch points in the Edinburgh calendar that where Scotland are playing rugby or when the Fringe is on, you can be paying hundreds, if not thousands of pounds for a really average hotel in the middle of Edinburgh. There just aren't enough hotels. Highlands of Scotland as well, because people just stay outside Edinburgh, come in for what their gig is and what their event is, and then go back out. Would you believe it? They have put 3 nights in Edinburgh during the Edinburgh Fringe. And so already we're seeing this trend of hotel prices getting really, really high, pinch point with accommodation because there's a lot of short-term rental regulation in Edinburgh. So it'll be interesting to see how the council choose to react to it, because they do try and relax rules around Fringe. And clearly this is another one of those pinch point moments. So yeah, not amazing planning. We talk about over-tourism and towns being sort of bombed with people at the same time. This feels like another example of that. If you are Edinburgh, you'd much rather this to be in September, October, when things are a bit quieter. Especially for a gig where you can be indoors. It won't be an open air event in Scotland, that's for sure. Although no, so I'm wrong. Actually, you're right. It is an open air event, but I mean, still, you could do an indoor one in September, October. So yeah, it just feels like potentially bad planning, and we are going to see some pinch points. So fun. Let's keep an eye on what's going on. Any thoughts on it, Sarah?
No, I've got to listen to the full musical catalog and come back to you. I'm excited to see kind of how the market reacts. I totally agree with you. I wonder if anybody in city planning actually speaks to the people planning these major events. I wonder if Oasis called up the city council and was like, "Hi, we want to do it then." Does the city have any weight to tell them no?
Well, I think
or is it just venue availability?
I'm pretty sure they will, because it has to involve policing, crowd control. I'm pretty sure. And so this is reason I double back on what we're saying, at the rugby stadium in Scotland. So the police would be needed, and roads would maybe need to be closed. So yeah, I think it should be a coordinated effort. It's really interesting. Or maybe it's just a case of make as much money for the city as you can during the summer months and then slightly go into hibernation mode. Maybe that's easier for restaurants and vendors. I don't know. It just feels like a missed opportunity to try and de-seasonalize the market. But there we go. I guess it's either you say yes to Oasis or they go somewhere else. So potentially you don't have a
Yeah.
choice in the matter. Don't know. I am thinking though, Sarah, perhaps we should be going live from the Edinburgh Festival next year. What do you think?
Count me in. Count me in. I've been to Edinburgh once, and it was August, and I got cold because it was so cold, and I had to buy a scarf. So I will prepare this time. I will bring weather appropriate clothing. I remember everyone asking me like, "Where are you coming from?" "Oh, Barcelona." "What the hell are you doing here?" Why did you come here?
Instead of bringing weather appropriate clothing, Sarah, bring all of the clothing that you possess in Barcelona, and that's probably
Okay.
about right. And then buy a couple of items on your way. Second thing that quickly caught my eye is this Florence court ruling. Did you see this at all, Sarah?
Oh, I haven't seen the update.
It's
Tell us
interesting.
more.
Interesting. Just a quick update here. Don't want to go into it too much because we do a lot on regulation, but
Mm.
court decision. The court of Florence has ruled the city cannot prohibit property owners from renting out. This case is about 2 apartments that are near the railway station as short-term rentals. And the legal reason for this, according to this court, is that limiting room rental or self-catering apartment restrictions actually restricts the right of property ownership. So telling someone what they can do with their property. And I think you've touched on this before around this thing.
I have-
And we know, and you're going to go through this EY report now, we know that the vast majority of hosts are hosts that potentially use their properties themselves a little bit, or they rent out their room when they go out of town, or they live in the countryside and they split their time. This court in Florence has ruled that actually it's undemocratic and it's unfair. So what was going on was undemocratic, and actually it's not right to limit what someone can do in their property. So I think the precedence here is really interesting because we know that generally the Italian government is taking a macro view on what they should be doing around short-term rental regulation. But clearly different cities are going to take a different view depending on what their tourist mix is. And I said this a few weeks ago on the pod, but I think it should really be down to the local area because they're the best people to decide what they want to happen in their neighborhoods. And they are directly accountable to local residents, so they can be voted out. So I think that's kind of the fairest way. What it also shows me is that clearly regulating, sensible regulation, is better than trying to ban, because trying to ban just affects people's right to make money and doesn't take into account situations and how people are using the property. So again, it reinforces that point that we always make sensible regulation. So
Yeah, this is one I've always struggled with, Leo, because as a resident of a major European city, I want it to be full of locals. I don't want it to be full of people, even though I'm not a local, but I've lived here for years, so I feel like I am.
you are.
I don't want it just to be, the whole city center is only for tourists. And there are definitely areas of the city that are like that in Barcelona. But then the other side of me, especially the American side, is like, you can't tell me what I can do with my property. It's illegal. It's mine. I can do what I want. If I want to rent it, as long as I own it, it's different if you're doing arbitrage or something like that, fine. But like a property that I own, who are you to tell me what I can do with my property? If I'm renting it out and I'm paying you taxes on that, like you can set, like for me, it's more about tax limitations rather than regulation in that case. It's like make it unattractive for me from a tax perspective or a fiscal perspective to do that. Fine. But like an outright ban or super strict restrictions, I really do think it should be illegal if it's not already, because it's infringing on private property rights. So
anyway.
Well,
that's and that's what this court in Florence has ruled. So again, that's why the article kind of caught my eye, because I've heard you say similar things on the pod, and I think it's interesting. In the case of these 2 particular apartments, they just tried to say it was going against the rules of the building, and actually the court has overturned it. So battles will, I think, intensify through. It's been an interesting year in Europe. We've obviously seen the tourists have come. We've seen, as per usual, a record growth year for the industry, with some guardrails on that enthusiasm given the slight ADR drops in certain areas. But essentially another big year for the industry. And I think next year we're going to see the conversations around over-tourism and regulation come back. I just pray that we're having sensible debates about it at the local level to make sure that we come up with solutions that actually solve problems and don't penalize people who are trying to rent out a room or rent out their whole property. Now, on that, very much so, related here, tell us what you're going to talk about today, Sarah.
Yeah. So this is an article that Airbnb posted, but it's not an Airbnb article. So it's well, it is an article from them, but it's a report from Ernst Young, talking about Airbnb's impact on the UK housing market. And this is super interesting because I think oftentimes short-term rentals in our industry is scapegoated for rising house prices, and there's not always a lot of great data to kind of back up our hypothesis that it actually has minimal impact, right? So here's some of the high level findings from this report. So first of all, that there was a minimal impact on housing overall. So the report found little to no relationship between Airbnb activity and rising house or rental prices in the UK. It cites that over 95% of house pricing increases are driven by factors like inflation and income growth. So nothing to do with different types of rentals, including short term. One of the other key takeaways was just overall mentioning about the economic contribution that short-term rentals make. So in 2023 alone, Airbnb contributed 5.7 billion pounds to the UK economy, and that supported over 75,000 jobs. And London, of course, saw the highest benefit. That was 1.5 billion. So it's still an economic driver as well that I think a lot of times is not taken into consideration when these kind of sweeping regulations or bans are put into place. The other takeaway was about host income. So talking about how this is actually local people's livelihood. So 40% of UK hosts were relying on Airbnb and their earnings to either help afford their homes, um, and or subsidize their other income from their regular job. And most of the listings for those properties were rented less than 3 days a month. So it seems like even though, in maybe in major markets where properties are full time, this report was finding essentially that a lot of it was much more going back to the core of what Airbnb was originally kind of crafted for, which is like share your space when you're not using it, I think. Um, there's also a really limited impact on housing stock, and this is one that we focused on with when they mentioned the Barcelona ban, right? Just talking about the super low percentage of overall housing that short-term rentals represented, and in the UK we see something really similar. So entire places or entire homes that are listed on Airbnb in the UK represent less than 0.7% of all UK housing supply. So it's just not super significant if we're being statistically round. Um, and then also talking about again like economic benefits of not only the host, of course, and them contributing to the local economy, but also the guests who are coming to stay there. So supporting local businesses, and the impact that would be felt by that as well. So I think for me, it was a really interesting report. It's been a while since we've seen actual data on anything like this. I think we've always kind of had our opinions, and we can run stats on, okay, how many properties are there in Barcelona, for example, and how many short-term rentals are there, ergo, it's a really small percentage of the overall supply. But I don't know. I found it interesting from a third-party source. I don't know who paid for the report. I think we have to take that with a grain of salt. I have a distinct feeling Airbnb might have hired Ernst Young to this report, but
Yeah.
it was still cool to see the data behind it, and I would hope that Ernst Young has integrity enough to not lie about numbers and figures and finesse them too much. So I don't know. What do you think, Leo?
Well, I think that's right. Obviously, it's an Airbnb sponsored report, but it's from a very credible source. So I think you're being practical and pragmatic in how you're approaching it. A few things jump out. Travel on Airbnb generated 5.7 billion in 2023 for the UK economy. We talked about this. I'd say that's a lowball estimate, because you have so many software businesses as well that benefit from the space that I don't know if they're fully taken into account, because they're global software companies but have a kind of a UK presence. I would include my business in that. Clearly, we have clients all over the world, but we have a decent amount of our employee bases here in the UK, remote UK and London, that benefits from the UK being a force within the global short-term rental market.
Mm.
I also think that this figure of 75,000 jobs is therefore even slightly undercooked. And you mentioned it, but I think it's really important. We've got to tell the story in our industry about how we are part of the tourism sector. So we're providing revenue for local shops, cafes, businesses. I always give the example of the Highlands of Scotland. One, because I'm very passionate about how beautiful that part of the world is. You've never been, right, to the Highlands, Sarah?
I've never been, but I am obsessed with a Highland
Hi-
Scottish cow.
Yeah.
I have like a whole page on my Instagram just dedicated to them. Like we've saved pictures of them. And I love hiking, so I need to go.
You got to go, right? Well, let's encourage you to go because you'd absolutely love it. You'd love it, love it, love it. And it doesn't have enough accommodation. And clearly, you've got these little towns that what allows them to exist and the lifeblood is the fact that they get visitor numbers coming through as well. It's not only negative. It's very, very positive. I wouldn't even say it's negative at all. It's the fact that the cafes and the shops, the local population would not be able to sustain those businesses, and I'm sure they do a lot less trade in the slower times of year, and that's when they take their holidays and the town starts to relax. So we've got to think about all of those things, and let's talk about the actual stats on it. The fact that it is only 0.7% of total UK dwellings. Factor in what I pulled out from the report is where it gets to listings that are available for 90 plus nights. It's 0.17. So really, really small numbers here. But clearly something that we're both very passionate about is the fact that in areas where you need to have sensible rules to make sure that locals can afford to live, or at least parts of the city available for locals, then you need to enact those rules. But painting the industry with the same brush across the UK is dangerous, because you're going to affect the revenue of lots of local businesses and the aggregated effect is going to be bad for the UK economy. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting report. I really do.
I wonder as well, like whenever these kind of sweeping regulations are coming out, I know in Spain something similar is happening. We talked about the fact that Italy is looking at regulating on more of a national level. I wonder if these kind of local eccentricities, if we will be taken into account, because it's not the same. Even a town with a population of X, or between this and this, they're not the same from one town to the other. And so I do wonder if they'll take that into effect. I know there's regulation that Spain has been saying that they're going to put together an overall like housing regulation. So that would impact not just short term, but also, midterm stays, for example, that are between 32 days and 11 months, 12 months, whatever it is. So I don't know. I wonder if they're going to think about those things. I hope they do.
Let's see. I think I'm fairly pessimistic, but I hope it becomes more part of the dialogue, a greater part of the dialogue. Interestingly, last night I was fanning through the State of the Short-Term Rental Industry report that Rent Responsibly do, and there's some really interesting findings in there. Just pulled out a couple. One is that 2/3 of STR owners have just one property, and 4 out of 5 short-term rental hosts use their properties for their own vacations. So again, it's similar to what this report shown in the UK, that what traditionally the industry says it's doing is it's allowing people to have a holiday home and use it themselves and rent it out when they're not using it. It's living up to that. And I think people sometimes misinterpret the industry because they can't make the definition between someone who's managing properties on behalf of an individual owner and somebody that's creating their own portfolio of homes, and they might own like a dozen properties that they put on the short-term rental market. That is rare. It's much more common for somebody to manage other people's properties and to just be one owner of said property. So yeah, I think it's an educate. It goes back to when I speak to people around the world about this. My friend John Hildebrand in Arizona always says this. It's about educating policymakers because they don't know enough about our industry. So we have a responsibility to educate them and make sure that what happens is fair and proportionate whilst considering the needs of local people. So yeah, interesting. Let's move on to a topic that I think you and I always love to go on, which is like how these big travel brands are trying to diversify their customer base at the moment. It's really fascinating. It's the turn of Expedia CEO Arian Goran to defend the position of why they have invested so heavily in the B2B side of the business, which brought $25 billion of revenue to Expedia in 2023. Surely those stats enough would mean you don't have to defend it too rigorously, but there you go. Interesting. She talks about the fact that 30% of the B2B bookings that were made were travelers redeeming loyalty points. So credit card points, air mile points, and that 60% of the bookings occurred outside of the US compared to 36.5% with their consumer brands. So there's a couple of things going on here that I think are worth talking about. One is it has been a bit of a bumpy road in consumer travel. Again, it's not been the bumpiest road, and I think it's about to get better, but it has been a slightly bumpy road. So clearly, it's smart business for Expedia to look to grow its client base outside of the usual channels, right? So you're opening yourself up to a broader spread of bookings by going down this loyalty point customer route, corporate as well, so business travel. And they also see there being a really good opportunity to cross-sell their own loyalty program. So a lot going on here. I do think the thing that is most interesting to me is the fact that Expedia have a lot of these big partners wrapped up. When you go through the list, Delta, Amex, Marriott, JP Morgan Chase, to name a few. So they're really, really well positioned here to get their product in front of this customer. And I can completely see why they're focusing on it. I think it's a really interesting time for to put the short-term rental hat on. I think it's incredibly interesting for short-term rentals because we're then getting that platform on equal footing to hotels, which is amazing. And the more of that, the better. And the more it's going to bring a different type of guest into our accommodation vertical too. So that's why I'm so excited about it. The fact that you could be a Delta or Amex point customer and have the credit card and get the best of short-term rentals brought to you. It also, though, Sarah, makes me think, slight flashing red light. Are we ready for it? Do we have standardization where it needs to be? Can we guarantee that those properties are of that right quality? So lots to discuss, and clearly it's them trying to get away from the dependence on Google. But I think as a short-term rental person, that I get excited by that and also slightly terrified, I think.
I think you bring up a really good point, Leo, and I think that's why this has historically not been something that a lot of the big brands have kind of gone after with the loyalty points, and it's been hard to get the buy-in because there is not a lot of standardization by nature of the industry. In the places where there is a lot of standardization, you have like a Sonder, for example, where those, they'll buy an entire apartment block and everything more or less looks the same. There you have standardization. So I think it depends on the type of stuff. And that's where I think, for example, Marriott Homes and Villas, you know what you're getting. Everything's going to be a unique property, but they've had the same sort of issue of, okay, we have this property, maybe it could make it into the program, but it's missing one of the criteria, so it's completely out, even though it's an incredible property. So I wonder what the criteria are going to be, I guess, for inclusion here. Is it going to be every single property listed on Expedia, including all the short-term rentals? Are there going to be specific filters? Are there requirements that are going to have to change on the properties themselves to attract the kind of business traveler, maybe? So are we going to have to adapt the properties? And most of them, if they're managed by a professional with all remote work and things like that, they're adapted to business travel. But I do wonder what kind of the knock-on effects are. I think it's going to continue to allow us to professionalize and bring some level of standardization, not in the properties themselves, but in the expectation of what type of amenities you need to have or what kind of equipment you need to have in a specific property and sort of setup. And I think overall that's good for the industry because it means that it's going to become more ubiquitous. People are going to be less. I mean, I think almost everybody that I know has stayed in like a short-term rental or a vacation rental at some point in their travels. But for business travel, for me, it's always been a lot more interesting, for example, to stay in an Airbnb or to stay in a property where if we're going for a conference and there's 3 of us, that's super nice to be able to sit around in the evenings and bash out emails and do different things. So I'm just curious about how the overall kind of what the knock-on effects are going to be if you're attracting these kinds of business travelers. I'm also curious about the points that are being used. Are those points accrued through the business or are they business travelers that happen to have a personal credit card or other kind of reward system that they're now being able to use on the business travel?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of the two, isn't it? I think it will be a mixture of the two. People who've got their own personal points with
Mm.
Delta, Amex, Marriott, whoever it is, and then people who are using their company booking platform to book. So whatever the system is, whatever the travel booking system might be in their company, they're now seeing Expedia listed on there and able to pick it. It's very excited. I agree with you. And I think that if there's money on the table, property managers will level up, right? They will improve the standards of listings. When they're building new listings or they're remodeling homes, they will think about attaching every room to have an ensuite, something like that, which means that if you are traveling with colleagues, you've got that privacy and that kind of almost mini hotel room within a home, which is what normally is the clincher when you're trying to book group travel with colleagues, is making sure that everyone's got privacy within a property. So building it in that way. So I think it's a great opportunity. It'll be the savvier ones who adopt it and think about how they got onto it, and whether there is a standardization point around what Expedia will be allowed to show to make sure that every customer who's got loyalty points ends up somewhere which is very professional and well looked after. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'm enjoying watching this landscape evolve. We know Hopper are moving towards it as well. There's a battle going on here, and I'm here for it. I'm excited by it. So, Sarah, we had some other interesting news this week. What are you closing the show with?
Yeah, we'll close the show with the news about Host and Stay. And Leo, I know you were doing a hot take video with Dale, but yeah, basically Host and Stay has secured £10.5 million in investment. And this is going to support their expansion plans, which include scaling the property portfolio. So they're currently sitting at just over 1,000 units. But they're going to be they're basically growing the portfolio by acquiring other property management businesses across the UK. The backing is going to basically allow them to continue to expand their presence throughout the short-term rental market in the UK. I have so many questions, Leo. But I think this goes back to, like, is this a wider trend? This idea of, acquisition and, companies getting bigger by this way of sort of growth. And I'm also curious about what the knock-on effects are from those acquisitions. So is the goal to still keep the existing operations, have those hyper-local teams? Because that's something we always talk about. Is that's what tends to work best in our industry. And so I'm really curious about kind of what the strategy is from their end. And also, just looking to see how it's done, because we know the risks if it goes too quickly. And that growth path is leaving out the kind of hyper local approach, depending on the types of properties, right? I think if you're going business travel, you're doing a Sonder type model, then that standardization works, and that kind of rapid growth can work as long as the properties are in the right areas. And obviously, we've talked as well about some of these companies, Sonder included, having kind of just bad timing of some of the expansion, right? Just like through the sort of COVID recovery period. So I don't know. Are we going to continue to see this kind of consolidation in the space, Leo? What do you think? That was my takeaway from it.
It's interesting, isn't it? You're exactly right. As always, you're bang on the money. It's about what type of growth they go after, isn't it? You can't. The Sondering, sorry, the Vercasa example is be careful, right? Be careful where you're investing, and you'll put it in for a couple of reasons. One, like how robust are those rental agreements with the owner? Will the owner stay when they're part of a wider family? That'll all be how they execute the branding around that, and how much of a free rein they might give local operations, how many of the people they manage to keep on board, which I think is something they will be focused on, is keeping on the local people who run the businesses. So it feels that there's a sort of big brother almost in Host and Stay, but it's not dictating terms. So yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting. My big question is why now? Why now? And I think it is probably a good time, there's been some uncertainty in the market, to think about taking over from local hosts that might have had a really torrid 12 months or might be feeling the pinch and haven't got the scale to get through it, looking at the next 12 months, the slight recovery that might come, but thinking it's not quite going to cut it for them. that I think it could be a genius move from them if they come in now and then the market picks up again and they control the supply. But as I say, Sarah, I think you're right. It's all about how they execute. Really, it's not a no-brainer. It's can they execute it effectively?
Totally agree. Wow. Well, somehow almost bang on time, Leo. We never do this. we're usually at least 10 to 15 minutes over. So
I'm
our
proud of
viewers
us.
will be pleased. I am too.
I'm really proud of us. Sarah, it's been a pleasure. So nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. I've got you next week.
No, I'm going to Uruguay next week.
So you are. Amazing. I mean, look, quickly, we're on time, but tell us in 30 seconds, what's going on there? Uruguay. Come on.
Yeah. The guy I'm dating is from there, so we're going to meet the family. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
know.
We need a
Big
whole
trip.
new podcast. We need a whole new podcast about you meeting the Uruguayan family. Stop
Oh
it.
gosh, I know. I'm turning like Pete red now. Thanks, Leo. You've outed me on public podcast. Thanks so much.
This is great.
No,
Okay, if
it'll
anyone
be
meets Sarah around Barcelona or at a show, industry show, be sure to ask her how it went meeting the family in Uruguay. Okay, Sarah, well, I'm not going to let you off the hook. When you're back, I want a full debrief, and we'll release it as an additional bonus show for anyone that wants to know how that family meeting went down.
Thanks, Leo.
Okay, thanks everyone. It was great to be with you this week. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit like, share, or subscribe in the usual social channels, and send us an email. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. Tell us what you think of the show and tell us what you'd like us to feature more of. As autumn hits Europe, we'll be looking for new angles and new things to talk about. So yeah, always want to hear from our audience. And until next time, thanks for joining us.